Now, the cost of flights from London to Dublin is rising, and you can be charged over €400 this week. The cost is caused by the stoppage of ticket sales for short-haul flights by British Airways. To explain it all, I'm joined by Owen Corrie, editor of Air and Travel magazine. Owen, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
So, when did this trouble start?
The trouble has been rumbling along for a little bit. Heathrow under pressure. As listeners well know, Dublin was under pressure. What Heathrow did was put a cap on the number of departing passengers, not arriving, but just departing because of security queue, all of those sort of issues. They have extended that cap. It was to run through August. It's gone through September, October. British Airways, biggest operator in Heathrow, under pressure. Sort of the situation that we're all familiar with in match day in the Aviva Stadium with the dart. Too many passengers, not enough seats. So prices have been rising because they can't sell any more seats. That is the situation, and it does look like it's going to rumble on for a lot longer than we suspected.
Now, we know that security is run by the airports rather than by the airlines. Baggage is run by the airlines rather than by the airports. So who is calling halt to the number of passengers? Is it the airport itself, or is it the airlines themselves?
The airport, a couple of airports have done this. Amsterdam has done it, Gatwick did it, Heathrow has done it. They've said we can't cope. The one way we have of making sure that we have fewer passengers going through the terminal is by telling the airlines to cancel the flights, certain number of flights. Listeners will have come across a situation where Aer Lingus and British Airways were both had mandatory cancellations of Heathrow rotations, which caused them huge problems. It more or less hands all of that rescheduling problems on back to the airlines, and the airlines are very unhappy about that. What British Airways have been doing is just looking at their own rostering, checking in, all of that, and the cap on passengers that they're supposed to meet, and say, we're not going to sell any more tickets for this period. And that has had a knock-on effect then for Irish customers, because Heathrow is our biggest hub. It's well ahead of Charles de Gaulle, Amsterdam and Frankfurt in terms of an airport that we go to go places we can't get directly from Dublin.
Now, what about the alternatives? Gatwick, Stansted, London City. Rather than pay $400 for a one-legged flight, you might get a cheaper flight to one of these places and, give yourself plenty of hours and then get yourself somehow to the other airport of departure.
That can be done, but airport of departure is the Heathrow departures are what are being capped. So there have been cancellations in that sense. Getting from Gatwick to Heathrow is possible. I've done it myself. It's a couple of hours. It's not that dramatic. There is a bus service that does it. Stansted is a lot messier. We have about 40 flights a day, Pat, to all the London airports. That counts Luton with its 3 flights and London City with its 5, albeit in a smaller aircraft, but we have about 12 a day to Gatwick and 8 a day to Stansted, which Stansted would be good for soaking up point-to-point traffic, less so for connecting traffic. And Heathrow is about 15, 16 flights a day, generally works out about 12 Aer Lingus, 4 British Airways. Today I think it's 10 Aer Lingus, 5 British Airways, but it works out in that proportion. But there's another rider here. It's an important one. We used to have 20. We used to have 20 or 21 a day. It's already been curtailed because British Airways had a look at their rostering situation at the beginning of May and cut back.
So when is this likely to resolve itself? Because looking at the high prices, it looks like the airlines are not going to lose money on this because they may have fewer passengers, but each one of those passengers is going to be paying a lot more. When will it come back? I mean, is it when more availability of slots and passenger numbers are allowed to increase by Heathrow, and therefore the competition will bring the price down?
Unusually, slots are not an issue. Both British Airways and Aer Lingus have enough slots. Aer Lingus, some Irish listeners sometimes forget, is the fourth biggest operator in Heathrow. It's a very long presence there since it became an international airport in 1946. The problem is the passenger cap. That looks like staying in place right through the autumn. And the Heathrow report last week, the CEO was saying their problems could rumble over to next year. Big deal, because long term, Heathrow has already been slipping as a preference, as a hub, in comparison with places like Amsterdam and Charles de Gaulle and Frankfurt. Amsterdam has its own problems and has put its own flight cap in place. But it does look like this is going to rumble on for a lot longer than anyone expected. And there's a baggage implication, Pat, as well. A lot of the baggage problems in Dublin Airport are caused by the arriving passengers from Heathrow and the bags being left behind.
And finally, and briefly, Owen, you have used all of the airports you talk about. If we were to try to bypass Heathrow in terms of user friendliness, Charles de Gaulle or Schiphol or Frankfurt or even, if it's available for transit, Manchester.
Yeah, Manchester is used by for the Caribbean by a lot of Irish passengers. Charles de Gaulle, a lot of busing, but Schiphol is my favourite. Schiphol has run into its own problems in the recent months, but it certainly is the easiest of those big transit airports. Copenhagen is a wonderful one as well. Helsinki, if you're doing the eastern run, but that has been affected by the closure of Russian airspace. But here's the thing, it could work in the other direction. British Airways has been shoveling people into Dublin because it's easier to get from regional England to Dublin than it is to get to Heathrow for a lot of English passengers. And they've been sending, circulating travel agents in England say, get your passengers to Dublin for that JFK flight instead of the Heathrow JFK flights. And of course, that makes flights that would not be sustainable from Dublin. A good example, the wonderful Dublin-Seattle direct route, which resumed last month after a few false starts, they're all become viable. So it could be Heathrow's problem is Dublin's advantage. But of course, Dublin has its own problems. They've been doing really, really well with the security queue, solving that over the last bank holiday weekend, all of that. And but there are a few things they need to get up and running, and they could well be benefiting from this cap on Heathrow in the months to come.
Owen Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine, thank you very much.
Always a great pleasure, Pat.